Hello, everyone, and welcome to the No Butts About It YouTube channel. I am your host, Josh Butts, and today we have Stan the Jet fan with us, but we are not going to talk about the Jets or the Giants. We are talking about the team down south, the Houston Texans, who just extended Nico Collins. So stay tuned for that up next on No Butts About It. Alrighty, so we have Nico Collins, who was people were questioning the Texans drafting him initially, and then a guy came to town who is pretty good at football, that guy right there, and he had a breakout season. And so he ended up last season with 1,297 yards, 80 receptions, and 8 touchdowns in 15 games. The Houston Texans looked at that and they said, hey, Nico, come over here. We're ready to ink you to a new deal. 3-year deal with Nico Collins, paying him $24 million per year. And there's been some controversy online that I have seen. Some people are saying this could be an overpay. Some people are saying he's not that good, that they're overreacting. So, Stan, what are your initial thoughts to this contract?
Well, my initial thoughts when I saw the news was this is amazing. Texans are making a great decision. But the more and more I look at the market, I look at the Texans' future, and I look at Nico Collins himself, the more questions I have about it. I mean, to start off, one thing to keep in mind is they also have Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. So is this re-signing the biggest priority for them? Probably not. I mean, they have other questions, especially on defense, that I think would have been better answered with that money. But to re-sign him on a 3-year deal when you have a guy like Tank Dell, who a lot of people say has that wide receiver one potential, that's a pretty big iffy part to me, especially because he's going to be the 7th highest wide receiver in terms of salary in the NFL. Like, he's getting more money than Michael Pittman Jr., Mike Evans, and Debo. Those are big-time wide receivers. He's making more than his teammate Stephon. So the amount that he's getting paid seems a little bit high to me.
So, yeah, let's first look at Tank Dell here. So Tank Dell was a big part of the Texans' offense last year. He was a very talented wide receiver. C.J. Stroud was building a ton of chemistry with him. He had 75 targets, and that's average of 6.8 per game. He ended with 709 yards. However, he did have some injuries. He missed 6 games last season. So part of the argument with this whole Nico Collins deal is people are saying, hey, if Tank Dell can stay healthy, he might actually have better chemistry with C.J. Stroud. Now, I do want to point out that Nico Collins averaged 7.2 targets per game. So C.J. Stroud was very good about spreading the ball out between these two. But Stan, as you mentioned, the Texans made a big move this offseason. A surprising move to some. They brought in this guy, Stephon Diggs. And when Stephon got to town, the Texans said, hey, we're going to take the 3 years off your contract. This is going to be a 1-year, $5.8 million deal. So that's all Stephon Diggs is making. And we obviously don't know how he's going to fit into the Texans offense yet. Is he going to be the wide receiver one? Maybe. But let's look at his target share in Buffalo. And I looked at it, and he is very consistently around 160 targets. So now, how many times does Stroud throw the ball, right? Because we've got so far 75 targets, 109 targets, and 160 targets on average. That's 344 between those 3 guys. C.J. Stroud threw the ball 499 times last season. So it can be done. The question I have for you, Stan, is which of those guys do you think is the wide receiver one on this team?
Well, one big issue for me is I think Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, a lot of their types of routes they're running look very similar, right? They're both guys you tend to throw very deep down the field, bigger plays. they really rely on speed and separation. So because they have very similar skill sets, it's a little hard to tell which one of them is really going to get more of the target share. But I think Stephon Diggs, because of his experience in the league, might be a little bit of a better choice. And I think when you look at the Texans, look at some of their weapons on offense, right? Bringing in Joe Mixon after Dameon Pierce had a bit of a rough season. That's about bringing in a more established player onto the team. I think for this wide receiver room, a guy like Diggs, though he has had locker room issues basically everywhere he's been, what he definitely brings is a lot of experience in big moments for his team. So I think when, pressure's on the Texans, when they have, one drive with 14 seconds left and maybe 2 passes they need, they're going to rely on Stephon Diggs, a guy who has experience in those big moments. So I'm expecting Stephon Diggs to be the number 1 wide receiver on this team.
Now, I want to point something out, though. I believe it was the playoff game against the Steelers. Josh Allen throws the ball to a wide-open Stephon Diggs. Probably would have been a touchdown, and he drops it. Are we worried about Stephon Diggs potentially kind of losing what he had in his age? He's older. Do we still think he's that clutch top 10 guy that we've seen in the past?
I think the drop, as of now, I can forgive that because you don't see him dropping a whole lot of passes, right? He's a guy who has good hands, and it's very rare that a wide receiver, as they age, loses their ability to catch the ball. I think the only guy I can think of who did that in a terrible way was Randall Cobb. Outside of him, most wide receivers, as they age, they tend to lose their speed and their quickness, but they very rarely tend to lose their ability to catch the ball. So I think that was a one-time thing. I think Diggs was also in a really rough position. I mean, after the Bills changed their OC, Diggs did not look the same, right? He immediately looked a lot worse, and I don't think he was really the best scheme fit for the Bills after they changed their OC. So I think for Diggs, I can excuse that one mistake. Overall, we've seen him make way more big moves in those big moments than mistakes.
Okay. I mean, he does bring that veteran presence into the locker room at the very least. And you hope that you get that less of that, like, I don't want to say drama queen, but that's kind of what he was painted as in the media vibe, because there is a potential here that Diggs does become the wide receiver 2 to someone like Nico Collins or Tank Dell. They could also, with this contract, though, be saying the silent thing out loud. They could just be saying, hey, Nico Collins is our wide receiver 1, because they have paid him up with, you got DK Metcalf at 8. Collins is currently 7th highest wide receiver at 24.2. DK's at $24 million a year. You helped research for this video, so I appreciate it. You also have Nico Collins as getting paid higher than Deebo Samuel, who is a Swiss Army knife in the 49ers offense. Michael Pittman Jr., who's the clear wide receiver 1 in Indianapolis, and it was just extended this year. He's getting paid more than that guy. He's also getting paid more than, in my opinion, future Hall of Famer Mike Evans. So that's a pretty big statement for the Houston Texans to make. Now, I will say, I wanted to look into this. Is there a possibility that this contract is also kind of looking at all the other? So right now, there are 3 wide receivers paid $30 million or higher. It's A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tyreek Hill. As that ceiling continues to rise, and it's going to, because we have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb, all who need deals, and then T. Higgins as well. We want to throw him in there. As that ceiling continues to rise for wide receiver 1s, the ceiling for wide receiver 2s is going to follow, right? And so I looked at what wide receiver is the clear wide receiver 2 on their team, and the highest paid, in my opinion, clear wide receiver 2, I'm not saying he's a wide receiver 2 talent, that's just where he falls, is Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith is paid $25 million a year, 112 targets, 81 receptions, 1,066 yards, and 7 touchdowns last season. So now I'm gonna say if Nico Collins is the wide receiver 2, or if they do a wide receiver 1A, wide receiver 1B, similar to what the Bengals did, which these are two very comparable teams, as we'll discuss here in a minute. Would you put Nico Collins in the same category talent-wise as Devontae Smith?
I mean, right now, I definitely would not. I mean, Devontae Smith has looked great since the first game he had in the NFL, right? Nico Collins, his first 2 seasons, he did not look good. And as you mentioned earlier, there was a certain quarterback, C.J. Stroud, who absolutely changed everything for the Texans. And it was only when Stroud entered the picture that Collins looked like a top wide receiver. I think his first 2 seasons, he was sub 800 yards, which isn't bad, but isn't necessarily the type of yards you want from a wide receiver 1. He also was competing with Brandon Cooks, I believe, both of those seasons, and Brandon Cooks outplayed him in both those seasons. Now, Brandon Cooks, he's a very good wide receiver, and I think he's very much underrated in the NFL, but he's not necessarily a guy who a lot of teams look at as a wide receiver 1. Collins had 2 seasons playing behind that guy. So when I look at him, I don't think he's on that level at all at this point in time. Now, as you mentioned, every single year we see contracts in every position beat the contracts from the last few years. So I think one positive part of this move is that they're trying to kind of beat the market there. Look at what the Eagles do. Howie Roseman with the Eagles, their GM. He's always signing guys 1 or 2 years ahead of time. He's almost signing them a little bit too early. So I think the Texans might be taking a page out of the Eagles, who's been such a successful team, taking a page out of that book and trying to sign him before the market readjusts.
Now, I agree. I do think Nico Collins has to prove himself more than Devontae Smith. I do think you're right there. I think Devontae Smith is the more proven wide receiver. However, I don't think it's fair to hold Nico Collins' first 2 seasons against him because his quarterback wasn't Jalen Hurts. Devontae Smith came into the league in 2021 with Jalen Hurts as his quarterback. Nico Collins came into the league with Davis Mills, and I forget who else they were trying to trot out there as well. Definitely not the same level as quarterback, right? So could Nico Collins have maybe, if he was as talented as we want to say, could he have maybe elevated a bit more? Possibly, but also I don't personally think it's fair to compare Davis Mills to Jalen Hurts. So what do you think about that?
I might be wrong, but wasn't Deshaun Watson there when Collins first came in?
Let me double check, but I don't think so. Let's do some checking here. I will fact check myself live in recording. 2020. So that was during, unless I've got Nico Collins' rookie year wrong, which I don't think.
No, that was 21. Oh no, I think he was out that year.
That was his suspension year. There you go, guys. I know what I'm talking about. Let's go. I'm keeping it in. But so now that we know that, what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a good point. I do think Davis Mills has been underrated. He did play well. He's probably the best quarterback in his draft class in their rookie year. I think he outperformed Mac Jones and everyone else. But at the end of the day, for any wide receiver, you look at Garrett Wilson, right? Garrett Wilson played with Zach Wilson for all those seasons, and Garrett Wilson still looked like a wide receiver 1. Collins took 3 years to develop to that level, and he needed C.J. Stroud, who I think we can agree was probably a top 5 quarterback, right? He needed a top 5 quarterback to get those type of numbers. Davis Mills played well. I mean, I could guess that you're disagreeing with me on that based on your reaction, but I like Davis Mills.
I don't hate Davis Mills, but do we need to make a video that why Davis Mills is better than Trevor Lawrence?
I'm saying in terms of performance that season, Davis Mills performed better. I think okay. Obviously Trevor Lawrence is better, but Trevor Lawrence needed more time to get to where he is. Like at the time, it was really. I mean, if you look at the Rookie of the Year discussion from back then, Trevor Lawrence wasn't even up there. It was really Mac Jones people were looking at. Trevor Lawrence took a lot of time to develop.
Okay, I still don't know. I mean, I know Trevor Lawrence had a rough rookie year. It's just a hot take, but I see you have your tea and you're sipping it. Let's move back to Nico Collins before someone gets mad at us. So yeah, Devontae Smith, same pay area. Devontae Smith, we've agreed it sounds like is a higher talent currently, or at least a more proven wide receiver. Then what I wanted to look at was who was the highest paid wide receiver. Like, how fast is that ceiling moving? So in 2021, the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL was this guy. DeAndre Hopkins was paid $27.3 million per year by the Arizona Cardinals. Then in 2022, and this was a huge contract, if you remember, because he left the Kansas City Chiefs to go down south to Miami, Tyreek Hill got paid $30 million a year. I believe that this was the first time in NFL history that a wide receiver was paid $30 million a year. This contract held through 2023 as the highest paid NFL wide receiver. And now A.J. Brown is the highest paid NFL wide receiver at $32 million a year. What do we think the ceiling is going to end up being after guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb get extended? Because if we start getting into that $35 to $40 million range, which seems feasible, $24 million a year for a wide receiver 2 isn't that bad anymore, right? So what do you think guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb are going to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that's going to depend on how the salary cap moves. I think it went up by, was it $7 million or it's something crazy this year, way more than anyone expected. If we get another year of, I guess, inflation, and we see that again, I think you will see that those close to $40 million contracts coming up sooner. And another thing to focus on is the fact that, you know, the tight ends in the league, we have 3 tight ends who are definitely in the top 3, and that kind of runs down after that. We're watching a lot of early tight ends with big contracts not living up to them. We're looking at the running back position, and more than ever before, it's becoming very obvious that running backs, you know, they age very quickly. So the wide receiver as a position in football, the value of that position is going higher and higher every year that passes. So you're seeing a higher value of the position and a lot of good classes of players that are going to get re-signed these next few years. I think you are going to see some $35 million contracts. As you mentioned, Jamar Chase, I think, is probably going to be the guy coming up for the big contract. But there are other guys to look at, of course, and you might see $40 million in the next 3 years, I'd say.
Yeah, and so I think, honestly, and you mentioned Howie Roseman doing this, the Texans GM, whose name I don't have off the top of my head, might have made a very smart move here, because within 2 years, we might be saying this is an overpay right now, but within 2 years, this could be a very good deal. This could be, hey, we're only paying our wide receiver $24 million a year, which isn't that bad. That's where we want it to be. And who knows where Tank Dell ends up. And maybe Nico Collins looks at his contract, and then 2 years from now, he is like, okay, I want more money because I'm doing more, especially after Stephon Diggs leaves, after Dalton Schultz leaves. Dalton Schultz also got extended, so he's going to be there for a little bit. Joe Mixon just got traded. He's there. I believe that they redid his contract as well. They're just reforming the 2021 Bengals team, which went to the Super Bowl. And they're trying to throw everything they can at this team before they have to extend CJ Stroud, who, assuming he maintains the trend upward that we saw in his rookie year, is going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Like, even if you're not a Texans fan, last year the Texans were must-watch football for the first year I can remember. Even when Deshaun Watson was there, it was like, okay, yeah, the Texans are very good. And DeAndre Hopkins was there, and J.J. Watt was there, and you watched them for those guys. But last year was the first year where I was like, okay, crap, the Texans are on our schedule. We have to play the Houston Texans. I've never said that before in my life. Usually it's sweet. We get to play the Houston Texans. Should be an easy win. Let's go. Now they're a powerhouse. They have a young elite quarterback. They have this debate that we're having with who's the wide receiver one, which the Bengals had between Chase and Higgins. At one point, it's pretty much decided it's Chase now, and we'll see how that shakes out for the Texans. Joe Mixon was on both teams, and Joe Mixon is a very good running back who is trustworthy with the ball. He doesn't fumble. Bengals fans loved him. It was hard to see him go. He's a Houston Texan now. Wish him the best. Have a very good defense, and they have an improved offensive line. I don't think people realize how awful the 2021 Bengals offensive line was that went to the Super Bowl. The guys on that line aren't even in the NFL anymore. If I like Akeem Adeniji, Max Sharping, have you heard, no one knows who these guys are because they're not good. They were awful, and they still made it to the Super Bowl. This Texans team could easily make it to the Super Bowl, and if they make it to the Super Bowl this season and they win, that $24 million a year contract, that's the best thing in the world, right?
Well, here's a little rebuttal to that. I'm not disagreeing with your point, but I do not see Collins' worth going up in terms of value for the NFL through this season. So I think a better move might have been to wait, 6, 7, 8 weeks into the season and try to re-sign him there. Because when you're talking about him splitting the receptions this season, whether or not he gets more or less than Diggs, he's definitely not going to get as many receptions, as many targets as last year. So his value is probably going to drop a little bit. So I would say it would have been a little bit smarter to wait into the season and try to get a deal done there. That being said, perhaps the Texans were thinking, let's re-sign him before the season starts so there's less stress, less things to worry about as the season progresses, less media attention. And if that was their decision, that seems like a smart decision. But I would think that his value would have gone a little bit lower as the season began.
Now, let me ask you this. Let's say we're going halfway. Let's say we get to week 3, and Tank Dell or C.J. Stroud or Dalton Schultz, one of the pass catchers gets hurt. Nico Collins' target share obviously opens up a lot more there. Also, Nico Collins becomes more of a red zone target, especially if someone like Dalton Schultz goes down. That then inflates his stats more. And then maybe he comes in and he says, hey, I want more money. I want more than that $24 million you offered me at the beginning of the season. He can't do that now because you have to wait a year before you can do a new contract. But what do you think that they were worried about that happening? Because now you've got C.J. Stroud out of his rookie year. He's settled into the NFL. He's got chemistry with Collins. This could be Collins' breakout year. This could be an even bigger breakout year than we saw last year.
Yeah, that was. I would guess that's why they did it to deal with what they had rather than wait on intangibles they don't know yet. But most of those players you mentioned have been pretty consistent, pretty healthy throughout their career. So especially by week 3, when there hasn't been a whole lot of games, a whole lot of stress, any Sunday night to Thursday night game transitions. At that point of the season, I don't think that would have been too much of a concern. For me, the main concern is that if, let's say, this guy who had one great season and 2 okay seasons, if he doesn't pan out, you still have spent more than $20 million on a wide receiver. And, I look at, Alan Lazard on the Jets, a guy who had a really good season, being basically the second target for the Packers behind Devontae Adams, had Rodgers thrown to him. And then when Rodgers wasn't there, he looked very bad, right? So to me, I wish he had a little bit more of maybe a second season at that level, or a little bit into a fourth season at that level before they offer him the contract, because there's a bit more of a question as to how good he's going to look into the season.
Okay. I mean, I agree. There's a lot of question marks that haven't been answered and won't be answered until we get into this season. For that reason, my final verdict is going to be a mistrial. I just hung jury. I don't know. I need to see how this offense shakes out. I think Bobby Slowick has a lot of weapons to work with as the offensive coordinator over there in Houston, and he should be very excited. I think the Texans took a gamble with this contract, paying him more than guys like Michael Pittman Jr., Deebo Samuel, and Mike Evans, but that gamble could pay out big time in the long run. It sounds like your final verdict is you're not a huge fan of the contract, but you're hoping for the best for the Texans. Is that right?
More or less, I want them to be a good team. I enjoyed watching them. I want them to be the second best team in the AFC. Only the Jets above them.
Oh, okay. Well, as we all know, the Cincinnati Bengals are going to the Super Bowl, as I say every year. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, go do something nice for someone. And before you leave, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Josh Butts for Stan the Jet Fan. And see ya.